I'm Jim Oliphant with National Journal. I'm here with the celebrated American writer E.L. Doctorow, and we're going to discuss the current political and national security climate in the United States and how that may impact the work of writers here in the country. And I want to ask you just first off, so much of your work has been dedicated to capturing and maybe explaining certain points in American history. And I'm curious in how you view the point we're living in now and whether you think it compares to some points in the last century.
Well, it compares in some ways. I mean, if you're talking about the Cold War in the 1950s, things in the country were very grim and gray with the sort of shadow of nuclear warfare over everyone's head, and a lot of very extreme sort of political positions were taken, and politicians achieved office by accusing their opponents of being soft on communism. Communism was the great dangerous beast at the time, and people were having in public jobs as teachers in universities and so on were having to sign loyalty statements, and there were blacklists of people in the entertainment industry and several other industries who had gone to the wrong political event 20, 30 years before. It was the state of the mental state of the nation at that time was not good, and some people suffered. They went to jail who did not testify the way the House Un-American Activities wanted them to testify, or in the extreme case of the Rosenbergs, who were accused of conspiring to give the secrets of atomic weapons to the Soviet Union. They were executed, and even though there was a great worldwide demand for leniency or clemency, it was not honored by the American government. So that was the way things were then. Now things are a little slyer and more difficult to analyze, because there's something in which a government agency totally without any accountability has been discovered to data mining all internet communications, emails, and so on. And the effect on writers has just been revealed with a survey that PN, the writing organization, long-standing, mounted, and it turns out that professional writers who were part of this organization, a percentage of the people who answered this survey, I think around 25%, said they were self-censoring themselves. There were certain words they would not use on the internet. There are certain words that subjects they decide not to research. This is alarming in quite a different way from the way things were 50 years ago. If you think about writers censoring themselves, in other words, taking words out of their vocabulary, concepts which they have to discard, and the work of their imaginations is stunted. And you say, well, that's a couple of writers, but self-censorship is a kind of anticipation of sort of an antenna expecting general censorship, that is to say, the kind of black, dark kind of mood that is attributed to someone like a country like China, where they do interfere, they punish dissidents, they have firewalls, they control as best they can internet communication. And to think of that as happening here in some sly way is very alarming, because writers, well, I think of the writers who've self-censored themselves as the canary in the gold mine or the coal mine. You remember the canaries,
sure.
They could sense carbon monoxide, which has no smell, which human beings can't figure out, and then the canary would die and all the miners would run out of the mine. So these writers who are doing this, censoring themselves and admitting that, I think of them as the canaries in the coal mine.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up too, because you've spoken at length about history, about revisionism. I think you've said that history is a battlefield, and that we have, that history can be rewritten by subsequent generations. And it's this chilling effect that you're talking about. Does this affect the ability of our own writers to chronicle what's happening right now?
Well, I think there will be a struggle, and some people get hurt. The government has to be persuaded that there must be a change. There are two solutions people offer to this NSA invasion of privacy. One is that there be transparency. The other is that there be rules and regulations to control this kind of mining. Of course, in the 1960s and 50s, the FBI was doing just this sort of thing on a more primitive level, and they were being unconstitutional. The thing about police agencies is that they push the envelope, and with a sense of righteousness, whatever they're permitted to do, they will extend and stretch to the point of being illegal in their activities. But a very good analyst of the kinds of things being done is named Jaron Lanier, and he said, transparency is of no value unless you have the power, the computing power to analyze what the data is. And most people don't have that. In fact, no individual has that.
Right.
The other idea of regulating this kind of activity, he said it will never happen because people will simply ignore the regulations, as police organizations tend to do. In New York City, we had something called stop and frisk, which was just recently declared unconstitutional, where the police department targeted people not on the basis of their people having done anything or even being suspicious, but being black, young black men. So they were stopping and frisking people not for who they were, but for what they were. And that's not right. So police organizations tend to move past the rules and regulations with always a sense that they've got to do this in order to function properly. So that's the problem. If transparency doesn't mean much and regulations are ignored, how are you going to deal with all of this?
Have you been encouraged, though, with the disclosures about the NSA surveillance program from the likes of Edward Snowden and others, that there has been public outrage? Are we seeing a rise of a new left?
There has been public outrage, but not as much as you might expect. There's something about the internet that makes people sort of, even though the communication is miraculous and worldwide, there's something about the internet and about sitting in front of a screen or with a little toy that isolates you, I think. And I don't think there's been as much of an outcry as I would have expected from the American public.
Well, should writers be doing more then to
I think so.
stoke the public consciousness?
The point is, the analogy is either you have security or you have privacy. You can't have both. And that's a false example of how these things should be presented to people. I think you can have both. And who was it? It was probably Benjamin Franklin who said, in the name of security, you're going to lose everything. And I just think that this is a kind of darkness that could be engulfing us, where self-censorship leads to real censorship. And suddenly these states of policing become a police state. So that's to be worried about, I think.
And what is the role? What can the writer do to push back against the police state?
Well, he can. There can be conferences like this. There can be writing about this. there can be examples of why this is wrong. People have to be taught. This other kind of logic is, well, you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to worry about, and it's not doesn't have to do with you. But it does. It does. There's the idea of an American community of citizens is finally what is being threatened, where if everyone is down on a computer somewhere or is complete, everything about him or her, his tastes in music, the books he may or may not buy, the medical records he has, anything about him is laid out and as a kind of a pastiche of a human being. So what it all is about is being dehumanized somehow, being broken down into parts and predilections and tastes.
We saw that in the last election, as a matter of fact. Both candidates did that. They had, data mining machine operations that broke voters down to extremely precise categories.
Right. So people have to be taught that finally what you're talking about is a loss of the value of citizenship, and you become not a citizen but a subject. So you're subject to this vast machinery that may or may not take you down.
Are you disappointed in President Obama?
I would have liked to see a more defiant, aggressive kind of Lyndon Johnson approach to the presidency, who knew how to get what he wanted. Of course, Johnson had years and years of experience in the Senate and knew all these people and how to twist their arm. And I just wish the president did a little more arm twisting, yes.
What about in terms of standing up, in terms of either endorsing the NSA policies or trying to curtail some of them?
Well, he's a wise man, and he must know that this is the wrong road to take, really, when you start threatening journalists who don't reveal their sources, when you allowing the NSA to do this quite illegally, that you're making a mistake, that you're not with the American people if you think government all the time. This is a fact that presidents generally, in campaigns, they will speak about how they feel, but when they get in office and find what the realities of the world are, they tend to move to the center or even to a little bit to the right. So that's regrettable.